So we are going to conclude this actual 5-part story arc, but our 2-story arc with Sacrifice of Angels. Murphy, you want to give us your initial thoughts on this episode?
Yeah, I was saying a bit in the before. I mean, this is the end of the second act. If you want to view DS9 as a 3-act play, this is where the second act kind of ends, because immediately after this, we are going into seeing, Worf and Jadzia get married, and we're going to see, more stuff happening on Bajor and things like that. And we get introduced to the Pa Wraiths and all that good stuff. So this is where it ends, and we can sort of go slowly into Endgame. It's a very sad episode for a whole bunch of reasons. But yeah, I thought it was kind of a necessary one. I figured it'd be a useful one to look at just to see how the midpoint ends, Yeah, what did you guys think?
Megan?
Well, I really liked it. I like the 2 episodes together. I like this whole arc. I'm always down for a siege story. I think they're great. This one had a lot of really fun action, a little bit of a jailbreak, also always fun, and some very, very real, very, very emotional occurrences, but they're almost catastrophes. Whole characters' plans and worldviews are shattered by the things that happen in this episode, and the ramifications of that, we're going to be seeing for the 3rd act.
Well, I had thought of this originally all the way through, but I really enjoyed the complete unraveling of Gul Dukat and his nervous breakdown at the end. And it, not to comment directly on American politics, but if you're a complete narcissist and you think that the entire world revolves around you, when you find out it doesn't, some people have trouble dealing with that. We may be having that in America next month. So I thought that was interesting, but I was really fascinated by watching him literally unravel on screen. And when an actor can do that, and we've seen even in our last episode, we talked about a range of things we've seen from Mark Alameo, who plays Gul Dukat. And I thought he was acting as fine as any other episode in this episode, watching him unravel. The other thing that struck me the first time I watched it was whether or not Earth would be destroyed by the Dominion or the Cardassians. Gul Dukat, to my surprise, seemed to think it would be better to have them as a slave colony, or at least a covered a colony there for the benefit of Cardassia, whereas the Dominion and Weyoun, I think, were just ready to slaughter the entire planet. And if I understood Weyoun and the founders' comments correctly, it really spoke to how the Dominion was so inherently evil, or at least inherently antithetical to the way a Terran or a Federation member would think about life. And some of the things that happen in season 7, I think, the Federation introduces germ warfare. They introduce things that are antithetical to everything the Federation stood for. But you can see if it's whether you're going to be slaughtered or you're going to slaughter. Most people would at the end of the day say, well, if that's what we have to do, that's what we have to do. And so I was really intrigued by the Weyoun's and the Dominion, the founders' comments on what they plan to do with Earth, as opposed to the bad guy for 7 years. Gul Dukat says, oh yeah, we'll just spank him around, slap him around, and let him know who's boss, and let them bow down to me, and yeah, they'll be okay. So I was intrigued by that. And there's not a famous battle, but one of the battles in World War II is called Leyte Gulf. And in that battle, 7 destroyer escorts took on 4 Japanese battleships in one of those favor the bold moves. and half of the U.S. fleet was blown out of the water, but it so spooked the Japanese battleship commander that he retreated in the face of clearly inferior odds. And that's kind of what struck me in this battle, at least till the Klingons appeared, that I think the Cardassians and the Dominion got a little bit spooked by the boldness, or to quote last episode's title, Favor the Bold, that Cisco employed. And we didn't talk about Nog getting elevated to ensign, which happened in the last episode, but he is now a Starfleet officer. Yeah. And he is the first Ferengi Starfleet officer. And I loved it in the last episode when Chief said, "Wear that uniform with pride, son." And so I think he did. And I think he did himself prideful in this episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to chat a little. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Nope. It's on you.
I was going to say, I think that conversation between Weyoun and Dukat was one of my favorite parts of this episode. It was really interesting to hear those different ways of thinking about what victory means and, what you do with the vanquished. And it, the Jem'Hadar and Weyoun and his people, they look at the founders as gods. The founders look at themselves as gods, and they behave in the galaxy as if they are. If you are a god and you're ordering the universe, if something doesn't fit, of course it makes sense to eliminate it. And it doesn't feel evil to me so much as it feels utterly dispassionate in a way that a deity might behave. Exactly. And I thought that was so fascinating. And it made me think of that, what is it all but a trouble of ants under the gleam of a million suns, right? Like, so the anything that a solid does is so inconsequential to them. I mean, if we're to think that the wormhole aliens, that the prophets are gods, by that reasoning, the changelings might as well be, for the power that they have and the influence that they have and the way they experience the universe and how it's different than how solid linear creatures do. I thought, just so interesting. And Dukat, of course, in his blinding narcissism, his comments about how he couldn't believe there wasn't a single statue to him on Bajor. Inconceivably evil at the very human level. Whereas the founders are kind of this blazingly evil at an inhuman level. I just thought that difference was so interesting.
That's exactly what I wanted to get to, and it's the Cardassian sort of fury, right? Where you have one culture that's extremely violent and has fascist tendencies, but is also insanely passionate, again, like we've discussed before, about art and literature and culture. And the Dominion, which is essentially a cultureless culture. There is no culture beyond the link. They've bred culture out of anybody that exists with them. If you're a member state of the Dominion, you're allowed to have culture as they see fit, as these gods, like you said, see fit. But the Vorta have no culture. I mean, the Jem'Hadar have a strange culture, but it's essentially like governing through clinical dissection. Like it's very remote. But it's a really neat, and that's such a great speech. Like what was he says, like, the true victory is to make your enemy know they were wrong to oppose you in the first place. That's such a Dukat, like, Cardassian statement, Even now, even after the Central Command is gone and the Obsidian Order is gone, that mentality is there. And that's what we were talking about in the last episode with Damar. That sort of, you see rot, you cut it out, and he does that. He can't get past that. And it's going to take a Cardassia going through absolute hell until they sort of are able to get past that collectively. But it's such a good speech. My God, it's so good. And it's just the way that. Yeah, go on.
I was gonna say, Dukat is just such a if every woman, and probably a lot of men listening too, if you don't have an ex who was like that, you know someone who did. That's the abusive ex being like, she was crazy, just didn't appreciate me. Never saw that I did for her, at the hospital waiting room covering up the bruises. But really, again, human evil. humane, if Cardassian human, but the same. Just yeah, fascinating. But yeah.
So I really liked Quark's role in this, and he and Kira Nerys gave us some great action in this. I, I I struggled with whether this was an evolution of Quark because he was obviously doing something for a greater good once. On the other hand, I almost saw it as, if I don't do this, my business is going to suffer. So I'm going to
no
do this.
Profit in the Dominion.
No profit in the Dominion. As we say in compliance, do you have a business justification for this action? Well, in his mind, he may well have had a business justification. And perhaps it doesn't matter. But I was intrigued by what y'all's thoughts might be. Is this an evolution of Quark, or is it really something else?
That shot of him just barging into the brig with 2 disruptors in hand. I mean, it's so piratey. I love it. It's just fantastic.
Right.
Yeah, it's like a great shot, and he knows the Jem'Hadar are going to shoot first, and he has to get there. And I think he's killed before. We've established this. I mean, I think he shoots a Klingon when they get invaded. But this is not in his nature. He is not someone that's comfortable with weapons or taking a life, and that's significant, I think, for him. It's a much more action-oriented Quark than we've seen before, but yeah, I would say that this is the start of something new for him. Just because he loves his brother, right? So
I think that's it too. He often comes through in his own way, and I think this is one of the first times he did it. Like exactly you said, so actively. But there's kind of that look on his face after he shot those 2 Jem'Hadar. He almost seemed surprised by himself, and it was kind of a how could I possibly have gotten here to this place kind of feeling to it. I don't think it was a huge evolution. I think the bigger one came from Rom last episode, and I think this is almost as much Quark reacting to that and to Rom's kind of devotion to the cause as anything else.
Well, in that capacity, as a question, if we look at Rom and Quark, would you say that the roles are being reversed over the course of the series? That Rom starts off as the idiot little brother, but he is evolving as a person, and he's going to end up being the sort of dominant and superior brother in the end. He's the one with a family, and he's the one that's progressive and willing to accept change and grow as a person, and he sort of supersedes Quark in that role that Quark sort of dominated him, and he's going to be, not to say dominate Quark, but definitely be in
the leader
position of a higher position than he was, different status in their relationship.
What do you think, Tom?
I agree that I think Rom shows the most growth. And clearly by the end of season 7, well, I wouldn't say clearly, but by the end of season 7, he is a completely different person than he started with. Let me turn to the magic in this show. And it's science fiction, so we have to say, yeah, they can have magic. And that magic is when Sisko goes into the wormhole and contacts the prophets to get rid of the Dominion fleet that's coming through because they think the minefield is down. And I struggled with that the first time I watched it. The second time I watched it, I felt like some magic occurred, but there came at a cost. And if there's a cost for magic, it's not magic. It's a quid pro quo.
Yeah.
And so kind of by the end of my thinking on this, and what happens, of course, is the prophets make the Dominion fleet go away, whether they've disappeared it, whether they've sent it back to the Delta Quadrant, whatever they may have done to it. But I thought I heard the prophets saying, you're not going to get to the promised land in Sisko. You may be Moses to your people. You may be Moses to the Bajoran people, but Moses doesn't make it into the promised land, and you won't either. And I won't speculate as to whether that ends up being true or not. But what did you guys see from that scene, and did it work for you in the context of this show?
I think it's an incredibly important scene. We never, that moment where, you know, you see the fleet vanish, and Sisko's like, very quietly says, wherever they went, I don't think they're coming back. That is chilling. Like, that is just a chilling moment in the series. This is also his conversation with them. This whole thing about game and game theory and baseball and all this stuff that he explains to them. He changes their worldview. If you want to say that the prophets, if the wormhole aliens have any kind of worldview. But he introduces new concepts to them when he first meets. And, you know, they say to him, oh, well, the Sisko's trying to change the rules of the game. They say, fine, well, we'll have to exact the penance. And this is interesting because I've always thought that this is where the prophets sort of set up Sisko in a loop. Because before he meets them, they have no idea, you know. And then they send Sarah back, and she meets his dad and whatever. But this is the game. He is the ball in their game that they are just playing with. It's really interesting. They say, you know, the Sisko is of Bajor, but he'll find no peace there. Well, Sisko wasn't of Bajor until he arrived at Bajor and met the Bajoran aliens, and then they went back and created him. He effectively created his own sort of time loop. Now, it's just a theory. I mean, I don't know if it's canon, but it's a really interesting one. And the fact that they are starting to view dynamics outside of the wormhole in terms of playability and strategy is very interesting. Because they don't just make the Dominion disappear. They stop the Dominion from ever coming back through the wormhole. This is them guarding Bajor for Sisko, but Sisko has to pay a price. And it's really interesting, and it plays very heavily into the third act. Just that simple little scene is really pivotal.
Murphy, did you almost tie that scene into literally the first episode of DS9? Because I felt like it could have come back to back, and it was so, you're absolutely right, it was so powerful, but to me it tied so much into that inaugural episode.
Yeah, it really does. It really does, because this is the moment where the Sisko is set in creation. You know, later on, the Orb of the Emissary gets sent out, and his prophet mother ends up going back on Earth. She leaves the wormhole, but there's issues with the Paw Wraiths as well. Like, it's a whole complicated thing, but yes, it does tie back incredibly heavily into that conversation in the very first episode in Emissary that they're having.
I'm gonna have to rewatch the first one again now.
So, what were your thoughts on that scene, Megan?
It was quite similar. So I was really struck by the fact of it as a suicide run always gets me, right? The Defiant Sisko, the crew on it, even little Nog, who's so young to be an ensign, they had very little expectation of a positive outcome here, but they were going to do it anyway. This is war. This is what they're doing. And then when Sisko gets into this conversation, I thought that the conversation he had with them was as passionate and it was as moving as his was with Starfleet in the previous episode. And I thought just the idea that it felt to me like the prophets, the wormhole aliens, were, deeply shocked and even somewhat offended by the idea that he would go on a suicide run. Like, almost like, what? How would you destroy my toy? Why? You can't possibly do this. And that he was willing to do this without having to end up sacrificing his life, but he does have to sacrifice his dream of the future. And that really, Tom, you mentioned Moses not making it to the promised land. I was reminded of Firefly, if you remember, the agent who says, I'm building this world, but I'm not going to get to live in it. And it really kind of had that epic, that biblical energy. And I loved it. I fear for where the Dominion fleet went. And I think that was something that was a little under addressed in the context of, like, of course it is war, of course there's going to be casualties, but that was a massive amount of death in the snap of a finger that no one actually talked about or addressed ever again. And I feel like there would have been more emotional impact for the characters who were involved in that. But that's kind of just a minor point. I thought it was a great point. Now I can't wait to go and watch the first episode again and maybe compare the two back to back. We're developing a lot of new episode concepts. This was a dangerous two-parter.
Yeah.
In terms of our free time.
But there's a reason I wanted to examine this one, because on the surface it just looks like another shoot 'em up kind of battle episode, but it's a lot more. There's a lot to dissect, and you raise a really interesting point too about the death of the Dominion fleet. Well, we don't know that they're dead. The wormhole aliens don't deal in death; they deal in time. So it's entirely feasible that the Dominion fleet still exists, just scattered through time. Right? I mean, the wormhole's been there for thousands of years. They can go forward, they can go backward. It's no difference to them. So it's very possible that in 10,000 years, a Dominion fleet might just emerge from the wormhole next to Bajor, or it emerged 10,000 years in the past. We don't know. I think that they're scattered. I don't think they're dead.
Okay.
But they're definitely gone. I can't see the prophets just up and murdering.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair
I mean, it's,
that's between them and the Dominion, right? That's
exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, them and the, as you'll see later, that's the difference between them and the Paw Wraiths. Which, something we haven't touched on yet, but I'm sure at some point we'll get into.
Well, let's move to the death of Zial. And you had some really interesting thoughts in our last episode, Murphy. Could you sort of explain at least why she had to die at the hands of Damar? What was it in Damar at that time which called for the execution? And then from there, what did that execution do to Gul Dukat?
Yeah, I think it's probably one of the saddest moments in the series, if not the saddest. It's incredibly sad. I wouldn't say the saddest, because we all know what happens later with Jadzia. So yeah, that's pretty horrible. And that's an interesting parallel. Damar kills Zial, Dukat kills Jadzia. It's kind of an interesting sort of look at it. Damar he's, first of all, as I said, he's blinded by this sort of brainwashing of being a Cardassian and sort of having this overly fascistic upbringing, and he's a military officer. And traitors to the state are to be put to death. It doesn't matter who you are. But he also, and you can see it in this episode, he has this adoration for Dukat. I mean, he really does. If there's anybody on the series besides Zial that loves Gul Dukat, it's Damar. It's totally Damar. He loved him when they were on that little cargo ship fighting the Klingons, and he loves him now. But he says, I want to teach Weyun a lesson for the way he speaks to you. And Dukat's like, well, maybe I'll let you do that someday. He is so blinded by love of Dukat. Dukat is everything he aspires to be, even though Dukat doesn't care for him a lick. I mean, he does in that, he's his friend, but he just, And I think that's why he's like, I killed Zial for you because she's a traitor and you're not, and I have to make you see that. So, I think that's part of his motivation. But it's tragic. I mean, it's a tragic scene. Right. And later, when Garrick coming back after all this time and being at Zial's bedside when she died, and Kira just being like, oh, well, she loved you, and Garrick's like, I never understood why. And it's just heartbreaking.
Megan?
Like, that's a good point, and maybe I didn't consider enough, is that Gul Dukat's love for Zial comes because she is the only one who loved him the way he's maybe seen other people being loved, or who does kind of give him the affection and the care and that emotion that he feels is his right from others. And that's interesting. I think, from that perspective, because she is half Bajoran, from Damar's perspective, she could not be allowed to live. That's a bridge between Cardassia and Bajor that cannot stand. I think she had to be ended if Dukat was going to be able to be a leader in Cardassia. Really interesting. That makes Damar's move almost patriotic in a really interesting way.
I think he sees it that way.
He absolutely does.
Yeah.
He absolutely does. Well, I was fascinated by the crack up of Gul Dukat and his descent into madness throughout this episode, really, because he can't believe what's happening. He can't believe what he's seeing. And then his daughter is killed literally in front of his eyes. And that is what takes him to the final level of snappedness. There was a MASH TV episode where they had a not visiting doctor, but a kind of a replacement doctor, and he snaps after a surgery, and the position that Gul Dukat was on the floor, not exactly the fetal position, but some leaning up with his knees up against his chest. That was exactly the shot from that MASH episode. So that sort of struck me as well. I found this episode to be as emotionally satisfying, as emotional a roller coaster, as good good acting as I have seen in this series. I can't say enough about how great this episode was for me. I want to thank you, Murphy, for allowing us to watch it again and again and talk about it. But you guys want to give some final thoughts?
Also, just a quick one. I think I like this episode. I like Sacrifice of Angels, but now that I've kind of watched it and Favor the Bold back to back and thought about them both, I think I liked Favor the Bold a little more, and I found it a bit stronger. So I think of the two, and it's really they are one, and they're part of the larger arc. But I thought I liked more. I found more in the setup that was happening in Favor the Bold, and I thought the resolutions were good. They were emotional. They were interesting, but the setup felt to me a little weightier. And I felt like the action and the setup and the fight scenes were amazing, but it was maybe a touch rushed in Sacrifice of Angels.
Yeah, I'd say that's probably true. I could say the same thing about Way of the Warrior. I think Way of the Warrior, probably rushing it as a two-parter, man, you could have stretched a lot out of that episode. Like I said, it's the curtain drawing on Act 2. And it also does something a little interesting. It's kind of where, and this 6-episode arc is a good example of this. This is also the place where, again, we take a jump and the universe gets bigger. So, if we started off with this town and then we got our big landscape, now it's spanning entire galactic centers. You'll see battles ranging from all over. Stuff happens on Earth. Stuff happens on Beta Z. This is, this becomes a bigger stage after this episode. And it's neat to see Trek do that. I like when that happens. I like when they get expansive. No, I'm glad we watched it. It's important, and Tom, I'm glad you suggested that we watch both of them back to back, because if we just watched Sacrifice of Angels, it probably wouldn't have made much sense at all. So, there's a very good call, and it's a good one, and it's neat to see where we're gonna go. I think one of the ones that I chose for later on was a continuance of this episode after a fashion, so we'll come back and sort of re-examine it again.
All right, guys. Well, till next time.
Till next time, folks.
Next time.